Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some year-round bloom cards using this all year-round blooms die set from Lisa Horton Crafts. And I'm going to do them as shaped cards. I'm using several of the nested die sets that she has. So I'm going to start with the Best Wishes frame, and this one is like the same as the twisted rectangles, but this one has some frames to go on it, so I thought that was going to be a nice accent. Now these are smaller than an A2 card, so the finished size of the card is going to be smaller than an A2 card. Each one of them is just a little bit different, but when I'm shaping my flowers, I like to add a little bit of dimension by curling the petals with my fingers, so they're still going to fit into an A2 envelope with that dimension. Now, after die cutting my two pieces for my card base, I use my Scor-Pal with my Teflon bone folder to score somewhat close to the edge. My folds here are probably about 1/4 of an inch, because I don't want to have too much of that glued together and reduce the amount on the inside that you can write a message in by too much. So I did it about 1/4 of an inch. What I typically will do is I'll put it on my Scor-Pal and I'll just see where the score lines go. Now, I don't have the Scor-Pal that has the measurements in 8s. I have one of the earlier versions. So I think if you have the measurement in 8s, you'd be able to get it just a tiny little bit bigger if you wanted it a little bit bigger. I already have my blooms die cut, and these ones are actually die cut from some Periwinkle Cardstock. I'm using a lot of expired or old Spellbinders cardstock colors. These ones were discontinued when the new color wheel system came out, and I have a few of these colors that I just want to use up. I'd rather they get used up rather than go to waste. So that Periwinkle die cut florals there, I did some ink blending with some Spiced Plum Cloud 9 matte blending ink. I also have some of the florals die cut with Sage cardstock, and I am blending some Garden Sage ink on them. Now, the florals in this die set, there's only florals. There are 3 different petal shapes, and each one of the petal shapes has a large size and a small size, and then there's some inside parts of the flower, the centers. No, so there's no leaves, but what I like to do is you can either die cut the same as the florals and use those as the leaves, or there's this one here, this is the one that I'm using, where if you die cut it and then use your scissors to snip it apart, they're pretty much leaf shaped. And because the center part gets put underneath the flowers, you're not even going to know that they aren't actual leaf die cuts, if you will. So it's a great way to use those same florals to create leaves, and you can pick and choose if you want an entire ring of leaves around your flower or if you just want individual ones to place where you want. Now, when I'm doing my shaping, I just use my fingers. They're tools that we have right on hand, and it goes together really, really easily. You could also use a stylus and a foam mat if you wanted to get a little bit more dimension, a little bit more curve, but I tend to really like the result of just using my fingers. For a sentiment for this card, I'm using the Best Wishes and Thanks extra large die set. This is one that I use often because I love the shadow part of it, and I also love the size. So because these sentiments are fairly large, all of my cards are going to be horizontal cards. If you have a smaller sentiment, you could do a vertical card with this and then do your scoring on your card base on one of the shorter ends, and then you'd have a vertical card. But again, I'm doing it the way I'm doing it because of the size of the sentiments that I'm using. Once I have my sentiment on my card front, I'm ready to put in my florals. Now, I die cut these so that I have several of them that are small florals and one of them that is a large floral. And for the large floral, I used a combination of that Periwinkle cardstock as well as Royal Amethyst cardstock. This is a darker purple, and I alternated the different layers of them. So I wanted some of the lighter colors in amongst that Royal Amethyst die cut. I also wanted that dark in there because I just really like the combination of the two. I also liked the dark for the frame on the card as well as the shadow for the thanks. Once I have my largest floral there, and I did the largest first because it's the one that's going to take up the most space. So by putting that one there first, it makes it a little bit easier to use the smaller florals and kind of fill in the different areas. So I tucked one of the smaller florals right up beside that larger one, and then one just a little bit lower on the left-hand side, and then I had one floral left, so I put that on the right side of the card. And I typically will put my florals down first, and then I will just tuck my leaves in where I feel like it needs to be filled in, or where it feels like that would be a good place for a leaf. I'm using some liquid glue here. This is Barely Art glue. I have it in a fine line bottle. This works perfect for gluing larger things as well as smaller things, and I use it for pretty much everything. To add just a tiny little bit of sparkle here, I'm using some Stardust stickles in the center of those florals. Now, I didn't use the floral center die cut for this one. I'm just putting it right in the center of the floral die cut. So you don't necessarily need to use the die cut centers that are in the Year Round Blooms set. You can just put some stickles, or even like Nouveau drops would be good here. You can do whatever you want for the centers of the florals. I like to do some with the floral center die cuts, and I like to do some without, just for a little bit of variety. To add a little bit more sparkle, I also put that stickles on the white part of my thanks sentiment. Now, it hasn't dried yet, but I'm going to set that aside to dry and work on my next card. So for my next card, my card base is done with that sage cardstock. Now, like I said before, I'm using mostly the discontinued colors. So sage is somewhat close to the new mint color. The new mint color is a little bit lighter. You could easily substitute that. But again, with any one of these cards, you can just use the color combination that you want. You don't necessarily have to use this combination. So for this one, for my card base, I'm using the Nested Tree Frame die set. And just like the first one, first thing I did was put it on my Scor-Pal and use my Teflon bone folder to create a score close to the front. And I do fold that score line a couple times before I glue my top and bottom together. When I'm putting my glue on there, I make sure to stay a little bit away from that scored edge. I don't want my glue to seep over the edge. Again, I'm trying to keep as much as possible or as large a space as possible for the inside for writing a message. For my sentiment for this one, I'm using the Wedding Day Extra Large Sentiment Set, and I'm using the Congrats from here. I chose sentiments that were the shorter words or the shorter sentiments from these different sets. Another option would be to use the A Little Hello or the Smile sentiment. I can't remember the full name of that one. Those would be great for these cards as well because they are smaller than A2 cards. I chose a different floral die cut for this particular one, and I only cut one large one and two small ones. This one is die cut out of the Barely Peach cardstock from Spellbinders, somewhat similar to the new Chiffon. Chiffon is just a touch lighter than Barely Peach, and I did my ink blending with Sugar Candy matte blending ink. You could also do your ink blending with like distress inks. Those would work well as well. I opted to go for the matte blending inks for these particular cards. You could also use the new metallic inks or even some interference inks. The only thing with the interference inks, sometimes I find it's harder to get kind of a gradual blend from having the ink to nothing. So that's one of the reasons why I like to use the Cloud9 matte blending inks for these ones here. And just like the first card, I stacked my flowers on top of each other, but using my fingers to curl those petals. So there's a difference in there between an A2 card and the card base. So these are more like gift card type note cards. They would work well with, say, like a flower arrangement, or just as like a note card or gift card that would go in with them. But again, with the shaped card as well as the floral that has some dimension to it, they just have a lot of character to them and a lot of dimension, a lot of texture to them. So for my center of my floral, I did use that floral center die cut, and I die cut it out of white, and then I used some stickles just to add a little bit of glitter to the center as well as the little bits of stamen that are poking out. So this is the finished second card, and once again, those stickles aren't dry yet, but I'm going to set them aside to dry while I'm working on my third card. Now, I thought it would be fun to use one of these floral die cuts to create a Christmas card. One of these floral shapes to me just reminds me of a poinsettia. So I have some die cut out of mahogany cardstock. This is a really, really dark color. It's somewhat close to the new Merlot. Merlot is a little bit lighter, a little bit more cranberry color. And the mahogany is quite a bit darker. I have the Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas die set that I have the shadow die cut in white. And I'm using the Lisa Horton solid gold metallic ink to ink blend on top of that to create a gold shadow for that sentiment. And I also use that gold ink on some white cardstock to die cut some of my flower centers. This is a great alternative if you don't have metallic cardstock, or if you want to blend in and coordinate your metallic cardstock with your ink blending. Because I use that solid gold to put a little bit of ink blending on my mahogany die cuts, it's the perfect one to use for the flower centers as well as the shadow on my Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas sentiment. I also have some of these florals die cut with white cardstock, and I'm doing some ink blending on them with rhubarb jam. This one is somewhat close in shade or highlight of the mahogany. I wanted to add some lightness to the card because that mahogany cardstock is so dark. I didn't want my card to be too dark. I used some forest cardstock for my card base, and the die that I'm using for the card base is the Nested Birthday Celebrations die set. I'm just using the outline part of it. I have that die cut a couple times. I used my Scor-Pal to score close to one of the edges for that fold, and then glued the front to the back. So once I have that card base glued together, I can set that to the side for that glue to set. And then I'm putting my sentiment onto my shadow. My sentiment is die cut with that mahogany cardstock as well. And I'm using that liquid glue pretty much on every part of the back part of my sentiment. I'm making sure that any area that's sticking out has some glue on it, and I want to make sure that it sticks really well to that shadow. I'm also going to, once it's glued onto there, put my acrylic block on there and set that to the side so that glue can set before I start to assemble my card together. I want to make sure that because I've done ink blending on the cardstock, I want to make sure that everything is dried and set before I start to assemble everything. And just like the last ones, I'm using my fingers to curve my petals. Now, if you want your florals flat, you can easily just have your florals flat. You don't have to curve them. I just really like the look that it gives. I think it makes it look a little bit more natural like flowers. Now, the one thing to note here is my sentiment is very large compared to my card base. There's not a lot of extra room here. I do have some of the larger florals and some of the smaller florals die cut, and I'm combining the two of them. When it comes time to putting my card together, I actually take the larger flowers off the back and only use the smaller sizes. It ends up, even though when I was die cutting, I was placing everything where I was wanting it to go, and I thought I was going to have enough room. Once I start to assemble my card, it covers up a little bit too much of my sentiment. I don't have as much room as I thought I did. And I didn't want to put my florals a little bit too much off the card. I want them to be attached nicely to that card base. So in the end, I take the larger parts of the floral die cuts off to make my poinsettias a little bit smaller. So just know that if you want your flowers to be a little bit smaller, you can just use just the smaller parts of those floral die cuts and die cut them a couple times and layer them together to create a fuller flower, but that way they're not quite as big. For my floral centers, that white cardstock that I use the solid gold ink to ink blend, I'm going to die cut it. I set it to the side so that ink could dry nicely. This die set has 3 flower centers, and I'm creating 3 poinsettias, so I can die cut them all at the same time. As far as I can tell, all of the flower centers are exactly the same. There's nothing different about each one of them. So it's just handy to have 3 of them and to be able to die cut them all at once. Now, when I glued down my flower center for the last card, I gave it some shape as well. I kind of made a kind of cup out of it. So there was the base part that I could glue to the center of the flowers, and the little stamen things, the little things that stuck out, I had them sticking up a little bit. Again, just to give it a little bit of dimension. And because I had shaped my petals, I wanted the floral center to have some shape to it. So this particular Nested Birthday Celebrations has this, it's almost like a diamond that's a bit curved in that die set. So I use that to create kind of a lighter area in the center of my card. As I said before, my card base is die cut out of forest cardstock. It's a fairly dark green, and again, it's another one that is discontinued, but it works really well with that sage cardstock that I have die cut for my leaves for these poinsettias, and those are going to lighten up the background as well. And this is where I decided those poinsettias were just a little bit too big. So because I used liquid glue, and because when I glued them together, I only glued the inside parts or the center parts of the florals, it's really easy to take them off. If by chance the cardstock happens to rip, it's just the back of it that's going to be glued to the card anyways. So it's not that we are going to completely ruin the flower and you're going to see the back. You're not going to see the back at all. So I have two flowers here that are lighter in color, one that is darker that's going to coordinate with my sentiment in the center of the card. Now, obviously, if you didn't do a shaped card here and you did a regular A2 card, you'd have a lot more room. And you could use the larger florals and you would have the room for them there. Again, I just did it this way. I wanted to create some shaped cards with some of these nesting sets for a while, and I thought this was the perfect opportunity to do that. To not only have just a unique shape for the card base, but also have different florals on the different cards with the different themes. So once I have my florals down, I'm going to glue my leaves. Now with these leaves, I took my scissors and I just cut them all apart so I have individual leaves. The part of the flower that gets cut to turn into the leaves is going to be tucked underneath the florals anyways. Now when I'm shaping my leaves, I kind of create a bit of an S curve with it so that the leaf on the outside part is curved around, but there's a flat area to glue that leaf in the center. Once I have the floral centers on the center of the poinsettias, I'm still using those stickles to just add a little bit of sparkle. Now I use the same stickles here that I used for my first two cards, just so that I didn't have another color in my supply list, but you could easily use some gold or platinum here if you wanted to continue that gold theme with it. I didn't really want to take away from that solid gold metallic ink, so I just did the Stardust stickles so it had that sparkle and you still saw the ink below it. So there is the first one, or it's really the last one, the Christmas card with the Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. And then we have our congrats card with the beautiful little floral. To me, it kind of looks a little bit like a clematis. I'm not sure what other floral it looks like, but to me, that's what it reminds me of. And then we have our first one done with the Periwinkle and the Amethyst cardstock with the different florals around, and then die cut with the Best Wishes frame die set. This is just a unique way to create different cards with different shapes. They're very, very easy to do, and a fun way to just change up your card making a little bit by creating a shaped card base. It's just a little bit unexpected, something that you wouldn't get from a store, and just a way to change it up. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. Have a fantastic day.